space, he's invited to shoot and does. And Leicester have turned the game on its head.
8 points above the drop zone and losing a relegation battle against Leicester at home. Clearly hurting from one of the most unbelievable injury crises you could think of in recent memory. And yet with less than a week to go in the transfer window, the only position that has found relief was in goal.
Tic-tac. Tic-tac.
Now, Tottenham get clowned on often in football media, even outside of England. The, let's say, characteristics are known.
It's the history of the Tottenham. We believe in the history.
Tottenham in recent history haven't been a particularly successful club, but we've also never been this bad.
This season feels like a potent, super concentrated version of all of the things that make life as a Spurs supporter difficult. Frustration with those at the executive level, which bleeds into frustration in the transfer market. And then frustration with consistency. And on top of it all, the unwanted 4x multiplier of it all, an injury crisis that, well...
Even my translator's injured, everyone. Just stay away from it.
So to help me out today, we have the brilliant Matt Hayes, whom, if you're a Spurs supporter, you may have seen on Last Word on Spurs in the past, from his own YouTube channel in the past, or the Transfermarkt socials of late. All of his links are below. So guys, let's break it down into the squad and injuries and Ange and the ownership and see what aspect is hurting Spurs the most.
Like I said, I don't usually win things, I always win things in my second year.
At the start of the season, Ange Postecoglou didn't fail to mention that he has always won something in his second season, but injuries have threatened to derail that record completely. 15th in the table at the moment, 8 points above the drop zone with just 1 win, 1 draw, and 8 losses in their previous 10 Premier League matches. So yeah, that trophy, which nobody expected them to win anyway, is out. To be fair to him, he's in the semi-finals of the League Cup with a 1-0 aggregate lead over Liverpool going into the second leg, and Spurs have Aston Villa up next in the FA Cup, a team they have defeated in their previous 2 meetings. On top of that, they are through to the next phase of the Europa League, with it just being a question of if they skip the playoff round or not, and they're going to want to. So the Cups are the good part of the season, but the league form casts a horrible shadow to live under.
At the moment, we're definitely playing like a 15th place team, but you also have to look at the fact that we have 11, 12, 13 players that have played every game every 3 days for the last 2 months at this point. You know, it's easy to look at the players that we're missing, but I think what some are kind of failing to realise is the effect that it's having on the players who are on the pitch as well.
And this is a point that I've noticed all football fans, myself included, can overlook sometimes. An injury crisis, especially of this magnitude, isn't just about the players that are missing. So often we'll look at the starting 11 and say, well, look at who Ange does have out there. That's certainly a much better lineup than the team that they faced, such as Leicester, for example. And there is truth to that on paper, but when this many players aren't available, the guys who have stayed healthy get absolutely zero respite. They are playing over and over and over again, and sometimes out of position as well, which weakens the side. So while they are available, they aren't at their best physically, and this affects the kind of energy they are playing with, the lack of intensity, and of course, it can lead to mistakes both in attack and defense, and a drop in overall form. When looking at an injury crisis, we have to take this into consideration as well. It affects the players who are healthy also.
I don't think it's a quality issue, or I don't think it's even to some extent a mentality issue. I think it's just a general fatigue issue.
And yeah, of course, we'll get into the other contributing factors of this and try to upstream the issues as to how Spurs ended up here. But fatigue plays a massive role in it. Just look at their most recent win over Hoffenheim.
They looked very poor going forward. They had no creativity. They never looked like scoring. And in the end, we only beat them 3-2 because the sheer exhaustion of the players. And Archie Gray and Lucas Bergvall at the end of that game, they both fell to the floor in exhaustion. The full-time whistle went and they just collapsed to the ground. Only 18 years of age, the two of them, and they put in another 90 minutes against Leicester on Sunday. So there's a lot being asked of the players that are playing, and it's showing in the performances where, you know, everyone speaks about that high line and how vulnerable we are at the back. And I think Postecoglou has become a little bit more conservative in the way that we play in that regard in recent weeks, but we still look very vulnerable because the players, they just don't have the legs to keep up with the amount of football that they're playing.
And I mean, that's understandable because it's not just the amount of injuries or how these injuries are also draining the legs of these squad members that are available to play, but it's where the injuries are coming from, as if the squad is being hit with targeted artillery strikes or something.
We seem to get these injuries in clusters where At the moment, we have Mickey van de Ven, Christian Romero and Destiny Udogie and Guglielmo Vicario were all out. So 4 of our back 5 are out together. We seem quite comfortable in midfield for the most part. But then in the front line, you have players like Timo Werner, Brennan Johnson, Richarlison is just back. But it seems to be one area of the pitch at one time is where we get our injuries. So even the few times this season where the numbers have kind of crept down to maybe 5, 6 or 7, it's still been hugely impactful on what we've been able to do on the pitch, especially in defence. You know, Romero and Van de Ven, if you combine their appearances this season, they still don't have a full Premier League season. I think they have 21 games between them, and we've 23 played in the league. But in every way, even in the severity of the issues, the individual injuries that we're seeing, it is much worse than anything I've ever seen at Tottenham.
And you'd be hard pressed to find another team, at least in recent memory, right, that has had to deal with this amount of injuries at one time. I mean, 14 players missing. That's about 61% of a 23-man squad missing. That's the majority, an entire 11 and 3 substitutes missing for a manager. It's truly crazy when you look at it from that side of things. Now, it feels very harsh to even say this about the players, given what they have gone through with injuries and exhaustion for those who haven't been injured. But how much of a role does poor form come into this? You'll remember last season, James Maddison's early season form was integral to Tottenham's success at the beginning of their campaign, and he's had difficulty in reaching those levels since.
His creativity is something we would have benefited a lot from, because he's the type of player who can unlock a defence with one pass, even if they're all sat inside their 18-yard box, a little maybe chip over the centre-back into our striker, or a ball to the back post to someone like Kulusevski coming in, and we haven't seen that from him really at all this season.
On top of that, the midfield in general has been suffering, thanks in part to Pape Sarr not being able to replicate his solid form from last season as well, in which the defensive side of his game was so important to how Ange had them playing. And with that in mind, given all the talk of the criticism of Ange's tactics, let's speak on those now.
But that's okay. I'm not going to change. It's who I am, mate. I've been like that my whole career, and I won't change.
There has been a more conservative approach to our football that the Postecoglou has been forced into, rather than something he's done by choice, I would say.
And there is something to that, right? As there's only one match that they have lost by more than one goal. Their 6-3 loss to Liverpool, who of course they beat 1-0 in the League Cup later. Other than that blowout though, they have all been 1-goal matches, 1-goal losses. Postecoglou has been steadfast in saying that he isn't willing to compromise on his vision, that he will live and die by the sword, so to say. But perhaps he has changed in that regard, if ever so slightly. But there are areas where you can absolutely critique his methods.
Again, I want to preface this by saying I'm Ange in, if you want to put it that way. I think there is a lot that he can do with this football club, but he has at times been really poor in his management of particular issues, and it's a brilliant time to ask that question, because yesterday against Leicester, we'd heard that Pape Sarr he had to pull out of training last Wednesday. He had a little issue with his hamstring, and we were all very surprised to see him starting that game against Leicester yesterday. And at the end of the game, Postecoglou said, well, he probably shouldn't have played because he wasn't fit enough. And that's not what we want to hear from a manager when we're already there's a big kind of magnifying glass on the way that these players are being treated and the way they're being returned to playing football from their injuries.
In some ways, Postecoglou probably feels as though his hand has been forced when it comes to making a call like that, as if he has to roll the dice and hope that this player's performance will buy him some more time with a win or a draw to make the difference, right? The cost-benefit analysis of the situation, for him at least, given how poor Tottenham's form is, points to giving playing time to a player like Pape Sarr in his situation. Things like this, you would hope, that a manager would try to hold off and not make things worse by playing a player in a delicate situation like that when it comes to their injury. And Matt even pointed to another example of this. Christian Romero and Mickey van de Ven both returning from injury to start against Chelsea. A big surprise for Spurs supporters, but unfortunately left that match injured. Not a big surprise.
It's an issue that's followed Postecoglou for his career. You know, everywhere he's been, they've experienced hamstring injuries in the first season because of the intensity of the way that he plays. And I think where we have kind of suffered a bit more is that for other clubs that hasn't followed through to the second season. For us, it definitely has. You know, Bissouma and Sarr and Brennan Johnson in the last 2 or 3 weeks have injured their hamstrings. So it's still, you know, very recently something that is troubling us.
You could also look to the Hoffenheim match, where they were taking on a team that had just a single victory in the competition and are absolutely floundering just above the relegation zone in the Bundesliga, with Tottenham's place in the Europa League table leading to them being quite sure they would advance still. It could have been a great opportunity to rest some players, namely Heung-min Son. But again, it's complicated, as perhaps Postecoglou would argue that ensuring they make the top 8 in the Europa League standings is integral for them, as they would then avoid the playoff round an additional 2 matches in their schedule. There's arguments for and against everything, but I have a feeling there's one area that Spurs fans will all agree upon. Ange Postecoglou has been let down by the lack of recruitment.
This playing group needs help, there's no doubt about that, and we're playing with fire by not bringing anyone in.
The way I described the window when it happened is exactly the same as I'll describe it now, where I said the business that we did do was really good. I think we made some clever signings. I think, sure, we spent a lot of money on Solanke, but we needed a player like him, and for me, that's proven to be a good decision. So the business that we did do was good. It's the business that we didn't do was always going to come back to bite us this season.
So many positions were spoken of as potential problem areas for Tottenham, and those fears have been proven true. Granted, the volume of issues is absolutely an outlier. This is an outlier season in that regard, but there was a need for proper backups in the fullback positions, because this is where it becomes a question of ambition, right? This is where you get to discuss what it is the club really wants to accomplish, what they aspire to accomplish based on the signings they make.
When we speak about depth, it's not about numbers, because we do actually have quite a large squad. It's just the drop-off from our first option to our second option. In goal, when Vicario got injured, it was Fraser Forster who came in, and he's 36, 37 years of age, and he struggles to get down to the ground to make a save. Because
it's all good to say that, yes, there are bodies available for Postecoglou to throw in should one of their starting defenders get injured, but are they actually good, or are they just good enough? Are they for the present or the future? After Destiny Udogie, you have Sergio Reguilon, a player who shows promise at times, but the fact that Tottenham have been so willing to loan him out does speak volumes to United, to Atletico, to Brentford, etc. At right back, behind Pedro Porro, you have young Archie Gray, kind of a midfielder, who's been forced to be playing as a centre back, and then Jed Spence, who has had to fill in on the left. At centre back, we know that at this point that both Van de Ven and Romero will be out for a stretch each season, unfortunately, and Dragoshin is the only viable option as a backup, or you can play Ben Davies, a converted left back to centre back.
In midfield, I thought we were fine. I suppose if we did have to pick something that our starting 11 lacked, was a winger who has the ability to take on a defender and beat him. And I think Wilson Odobert was a player where they tried to address that issue by bringing him in. Of course, he's been injured for the entire season since, but I don't think he was one maybe that was established enough to go in and be a main man in the starting 11 for a consistent enough time throughout the season. We just didn't address the core issues I think that every fan saw coming throughout the season, and we all said it then that it would come back to bite us. We didn't expect it to be as severe as it is now, but yeah, our fears were definitely realised very quickly this season.
Again, decisions like this give you the answer of how much ambition does a club have? What exactly is the goal for Tottenham competitively? If it isn't to be a club that actually wins things, which is kind of the point of competing, right? To try to win. Then what do they want to be? And then you see articles such as this one from Stefan Borson revealing that Tottenham have committed just 42% of their total revenue recently to their salaries. Clubs like Arsenal have committed 53%, Liverpool 63%. And keep in mind, Spurs have higher commercial revenue than Chelsea and Arsenal thanks to their NFL partnerships. And then, of course, there's the fact that Daniel Levy is the highest paid administrator in England. There's money to be spent there, but as of now in this window, all they have brought in Kinski, when they knew that their squad was thin, even last summer.
When you bring in someone like Postecoglou on a 4-year contract, that's your chance to fully, commit to a project and commit to bringing in the players that Postecoglou wants, and it just doesn't feel as though they've done that in the 18 months so far. The way Ange Postecoglou plays, it might be a problem at the moment, but the way that Daniel Levy runs the club is the problem.
Because it's time to change the situation. If Tottenham wants to change manager, a lot of manager, but the situation cannot change.
Postecoglou isn't free of blame in any way, and again I say that as someone who wants him to stay and who can see him succeeding at this football club, but we will be in the same situation in 18 months time if Levy sacks Postecoglou and another manager comes in and works under Daniel Levy. And it's going to be a constant cycle. There seems to be much more of a kind of collective approach among Tottenham fans at the moment that we just can't afford to let that happen again, and that we need to stand up and we need to kind of be loud in our opposition of Daniel Levy's position as chairman.
So as Matt pointed out, there seems to potentially I'm saying, don't get your hopes up, Spurs supporters, but there seems to potentially be some sort of light at the end of the tunnel in one way or another, as all of the moves that Daniel Levy is making seem to be pointing toward a sale of the club. Think of it like someone who is selling their home, right? So they're doing the renovations that may cost them a little bit, but drastically increase the asking price of their home. Completing the stadium, the NFL partnerships in Asia, reducing the wage bill drastically, etc. But the thing is, when speaking about Spurs supporters being vocal and actually demanding that their club do something to change their trajectory in real life, beyond online, doing it in real life, I mean, it's not really something that you see from Spurs supporters as prominently as you do at other fan bases, such as Arsenal and Man United. You know, you have the Glazers protests, the protests of the Kroenkes. You just don't see that as much with Spurs supporters.
The chants in the ground have been a lot louder recently, and a lot of journalists said yesterday that the chants against Levy after Leicester went 2-1 up were the loudest they've ever heard. There was banners that a brilliant group called Change for Tottenham who were trying to organise this sort of stuff. They had banners in the ground that weren't leaving anything to the imagination. The club actually tried to confiscate those banners, which I think says a lot about how they view free speech in the stadium.
But given the form of Tottenham now and how they are at a new low, just 8 points above relegation, I'll say it again, maybe now the supporters will fight for more change at the club, given their voices are starting to be noticed by international media, as it was against Leicester this past weekend.
I think that's when you might see people motivated to believe that it can actually make a difference, and hopefully that's the way it's heading, and hopefully something can happen in the next couple of years that puts this club back on a trajectory where the on-field success is the main objective.
Thanks once again to Matt for all of his help today. What a legend. Be sure to check him out, linked below, if you're a Spurs fan, as he's a great follow. But beyond that, thanks to you for watching this video, and I hope to see you in another one. Be well.